how's it going, everybody? If you're new here, welcome in. And if you've been here before, smash that like button on the way in. I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And I'm sure that you know very well what this box means. Yes, it's another box from Vosteed. It's actually the second one that they sent me recently, but it's so cool that honestly, I really wanted to do separate videos instead of lumping everything together. The smiley face means that we are talking about one of their knives with the Vancor lock. And you might be saying, didn't you already review a Vosteed Ankylo? And the answer to that question is, well, yes. Yes, I got a chance to review the very first version. But to my friends out there who are falling on hard times and need to spend as little money as possible while still indulging in the knife collecting hobby, the good news is that Vosteed has in fact released a less expensive version of the Ankylo. And so when they reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in checking out this one? I said, absolutely. Absolutely, because they have done a phenomenal job with this knife. And the truth be told is that there's very few knife companies out there providing knives of this quality in this price range. The fit and finish is great. The design language is great. The locking mechanism is really good. At the beginning of the year, I put out that I believed that Vosteed would be a breakout company in 2024, and so far, they have not let me down. In fact, I'm at the point where I'm starting to ask the question of, are you tired of winning yet?
Please, it's too much winning.
Because it seems like everything they put out is great. Even if it's not something that you end up buying, even if it's something that's a pass for you, you cannot deny that Vosteed has put out some absolute bangers. And there's very few people out there that I think would disagree with that statement, but I'm sure if you do, you will let me know in the comment section down below. The reason why I wanted to check this out was because it is a less expensive version. We are in a time in the American economy where people do need to save money when and wherever they can. So the question arises, for $129, did Vosteed deliver? Let's talk about the specs. Coming in at an overall length of 7 3/4 inches with a 3.2 inch blade that is made of 154 cm. This blade has a really well done stonewash finish, which is going to hold up very well against wear and tear over time. It doesn't have a whole lot of billboarding on this blade either. It says Vosteed right there on the swell of the handle scale, and on the other side it says 154 cm. And the handle scales are made out of 6061 hard anodized aluminum, and we are looking at T8 hardware on the body screws, T8 hardware on the pocket clip screws, which are recessed, so there is absolutely nothing sticking out on this deep carry style pocket clip. The insides of these steel liners have been milled out for some extra weight reduction, meaning that this is coming in at 4.7 ounces, despite the fact that this is very much an overbuilt beefy knife. The pocket clip is reversible, so for you lefties out there, don't worry, Vosteed was in fact thinking of you. But the true highlight of this knife has got to be the Vancor lock. And initially I called it the Vancor lock because it was a V and then a dash, and then they changed it and it's just Vancor lock. And it's a really special locking mechanism because not only is it a pivot locking mechanism, but it actually utilizes both magnets as well as a hefty locking plate. Now, I haven't actually smacked this thing around, and I've mentioned this in other videos before, but I don't spine whack knives primarily because I'm never really going to be in a situation where I need to baton with my folding knives. In fact, if I am in a situation like that, I'm just going to use a fixed blade because fixed blades are much better for that anyways. The only guarantee anyone ever has on a folding knife is that it will fold. So I don't really do that unless the situation calls for it. But you might be looking at this and saying, hey, wait a second, didn't you review another pivot lock knife recently? And yes, I did. I reviewed the Reccomended RT Peregrine Falcon. And while they are both actuated with the pivot lock, the difference is that the Falcon actually is a liner lock, which is actuated with the pivot, meaning that the lock is as strong as a liner lock can be. And on this one, it's different. It's not a liner lock. It has the lock bar that pops up into place, and then the magnet, which ensures that the button on the pivot stays recessed regardless where the blade is or whether or not the lock is engaged. And that is fantastic. We have some really great jimping here on the spine of the blade. It's not just a cursory amount either. It's actually a really decent amount. And of course, because we have this choke up spot right here, which is, I wouldn't say a 50-50 finger choil, but it's kind of more like a 70-30. You get way up there on the blade for some extra control. And all of that is coupled together with some really good ergonomics. Let's talk about the QC. Lockup, of course, is right and tight. It was on the last one I checked out as well. And then, of course, blade centering is spot on. And for Vosteed, it's rarely something that I ever have to worry about. One of the things that I love about them is that they always come well tuned right out of the box. Rarely have I ever had to loosen a pivot screw because it was over tightened or because the blade was off centered. It's not generally an issue that I run into. And that's one of those quality of life things that I've just really come to appreciate about them. Now, there is no backspacer on the Ankylo, and I gotta say, I kind of wish that there was. It's not a detractor, it's just a design choice. And ultimately, it's one that I really think could benefit on this knife. But I understand why they didn't do it, because 4.7 ounces is still a decently weighty knife. But here's the deal, because it's very well balanced, you don't actually feel the 4.7 ounces. This is a nearly 5 ounce knife that feels more like a 3.5 ounce knife. And I was kind of shocked when I looked at the weight, because I said, really? It doesn't feel like it's 4.7 ounces, but here we are looking at the spec sheet and making decisions. If there was one other design aspect that I would have changed on here, it would have been the screws on the smiley face side of that pivot lock. Those are T6 screws, and I'm not really mad at it because they're not screwing in tightly to the frame of the knife. So the chances that you strip those are relatively low because they're not screws that are going to need a whole lot of force applied to them to get them to come off. I meant it when I said, I think Vosteed has to be tired of winning at this point, because every time I check out one of their knives, I'm always impressed by the quality. And this one is no different. It's got a really nice deployment hole, which is great for reverse flicking or for thumb flicking. Because the jimping is well done on the spine of the blade, it actually helps with the front flipper as well. And then for you fidget monsters out there, you do have a low profile rear flipper. Now, that rear flipper is more of a light switch and less of a push button, and that is because it's also a front flipper. So if you don't get your finger out of the way, if you push button it, it'll go, but you will inevitably run into the back of that front flipper. All of this is $129. The more expensive version of this knife is $169. And the biggest difference you're going to see for an extra $40 is LMAX versus 154 cm. But I've noticed a trend that I want to address. I've noticed a trend of when we have a knife with a super steel, a lot of people are afraid to go ahead and use it because they're like, I don't want to have to sharpen LMAX, or I don't want to have to sharpen M390 or whatever. And so it sits in a case and it just rots away. But the joy of this knife is the fact that it is $129 and you have 154 cm, which is a fantastic user steel. It's a stainless steel. It's going to be a good all-arounder. And with that stonewash finish on the blade, you're not really going to have to worry about wear and tear. And then when it comes time to sharpen it, you're not going to run into issues there either. Now, I did in fact run this through just a quick cut test. I've already done that with the prior Ankylo that I checked out, and I'm not surprised. This knife, while it's not the thinnest here on the blade stock, it does get really nice and thin behind the edge of the blade, and it continues for a very decent ways before turning into this swedge near the tip. So going through cardboard boxes is not going to be a problem. Is it the sliciest knife in the world? No, but it's also not going to leave you bound up in the middle of a cardboard cutting session, or if you end up having to cut down some of your significant other's Amazon boxes. As far as the aluminum handle scales are concerned, I have already mentioned this, but this is a hard coat anodization on these scales. If you're curious what that means, I would in fact suggest looking it up. But hard coat anodized aluminum is harder to scratch than titanium by a vast amount. Hard coat aluminum is great, especially on knives that you carry all the time, because it's going to be wear resistant. It's not going to scratch easily, and it's one of those things that I really enjoy on a knife, because while I don't mind getting wear and tear on a knife like this, I also don't want big old nasty snail trails all over the knife, because I ended up using it in my left hand when I was wearing a ring. Now, if you're waiting for this, I will say that these knives index really well. I have no issue manipulating this knife whatsoever. The ergos are good, and there are no hot spots to speak of on this knife whatsoever, whether in a regular grip or in a choked up grip. But I do have something on my wish list, and that wish is going to be full premium version. I want a full premium version of this in titanium with a titanium backspacer and a titanium pocket clip and L-Max steel. And I would not be in the least bit surprised if we ended up getting something like that, but it is something that I wanted to make sure to mention in case Vosteed is watching, because I think that this model is proven popular enough at this point where we deserve a version at every range. We deserve a version at the lower end, we deserve a higher end, and then we deserve an ultra premium model. And I'm curious to see how many of you would buy this in an ultra premium model, or do you prefer the one that has the aluminum scales and the L-Max blade? Or do you think that this one just might be right up your alley? What do you think about my statement that Vosteed has absolutely been killing it this year? I believe that they are truly one of the most up-and-coming knife companies in the industry at the moment, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. So let me know. If you've watched this far and you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing. And by the way, if you want to watch more awesome knife and EDC content, feel free to click on one of the videos that pops up next.